The scalding coffee dripped from my hair onto the kitchen floor, each drop mixing with my tears as I crouched there, trembling. The burning sensation across my scalp was nothing compared to the fire of humiliation blazing in my chest. Above me, my husband Austin stood with the empty mug in his hand, his face twisted with the same cruel satisfaction I'd seen too many times before. His mother, Claudia, sat at my kitchen table, clapping her hands together like she'd just watched her favorite show. But then something happened that would change everything forever. My 6-year-old son Riker, who had been sitting quietly in the corner with his own small cup of coffee, the kind I made him with mostly milk and just a splash of coffee to make him feel grown up, suddenly stood up. His little face was flushed red, his hands shaking with an emotion I'd never seen in him before. What he did next would turn our lives upside down and set in motion a chain of events that would bring my abusers to their knees. But to understand how we got to that moment, I need to take you back to where it all began. My name is Lucy Austin, though I wish I could take back that last name and everything it represents. 6 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be cowering on my own kitchen floor while my husband poured hot coffee on me for sport, I would have laughed. I was strong, independent, and successful. I had a thriving career as a financial consultant, my own apartment in downtown Seattle, and a bank account that could support any dream I might have. But love, or what I thought was love, has a way of making even the strongest people vulnerable. I met Austin Petron at a coffee shop, which now seems like cruel irony. He was charming, handsome, and had this way of making me feel like I was the only woman in the room. He worked in construction, or so he told me, and spoke about his dreams of starting his own company. He was different from the stuffy corporate men I usually dated, rougher around the edges, more real. "You're too good for a guy like me," he'd say, flashing that crooked smile that made my heart skip. "But I'm gonna work every day to deserve you." Those words should have been a red flag. Instead, they made me want to prove him wrong, to show him he was worthy of love. I was so busy trying to build him up that I didn't notice how he was slowly tearing me down. The first sign came 3 months into our relationship. I was working late on a particularly challenging client case when Austin showed up at my office unannounced. "Babe, you missed our dinner reservation," he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm so sorry," I said, genuinely apologetic. "This merger is more complicated than I expected. Can we reschedule for tomorrow?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You know what, Lucy? Sometimes I wonder if your career is more important to you than I am." The accusation hit me like a slap. "That's not fair, Austin. You know how much you mean to me." "Do I?" He sat on the edge of my desk, his voice taking on a hurt tone that made my chest ache. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you choose work over us every time." I ended up leaving early that night, abandoning the merger documents that my team needed by morning. It cost me credibility with my colleagues and nearly lost us the client. But Austin was so grateful, so loving afterward, that I convinced myself it was worth it. That's how it started. Small compromises that seemed reasonable in the moment but added up to something much bigger. He'd pout when I worked late, sulk when I made plans with friends, and somehow always had a crisis that required my immediate attention whenever I had something important to do. "I just need you so much, Lucy," he'd say, holding me close. "You're all I have." By the time he proposed, I was so isolated from my support system and so dependent on his approval that saying yes felt like the only option. The wedding was small, just his family and a few of my remaining friends. My parents had died in a car accident 2 years earlier, leaving me with a substantial inheritance that Austin suddenly seemed very interested in discussing. "We should combine our finances," he suggested on our honeymoon. "What's mine is yours and what's yours is mine, right?" I was so happy to finally belong to someone again, to have a family, that I agreed without hesitation. Within a month, Austin had access to all my accounts. Within 6 months, my inheritance was gone, invested in his business ventures that never seemed to materialize. "Don't worry about it, babe," he'd say whenever I asked about the money. "I'm working on something big. You'll see." But what I saw was bill after bill marked overdue, and Austin spending more time at bars than at any job site. When I suggested he might want to look for steady employment, his response was swift and brutal. "Are you calling me a failure?" he demanded, his voice rising to a shout. "After everything I've sacrificed for you? What have you sacrificed?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. His hand moved so fast I barely saw it coming. The slap echoed through our apartment, followed by a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. "Look what you made me do," he said, his voice suddenly soft and broken. "God, Lucy, I'm so sorry. I never meant. You just pushed me so hard." He cried that night, real tears that soaked through my nightgown as he held me and promised it would never happen again. He was so convincing, so genuinely remorseful that I believed him. More than that, I believed it was partially my fault for pushing him when he was clearly struggling. The next morning, he brought me coffee in bed and told me he'd found a job at a construction company across town. "I'm going to be better," he whispered against my hair. "You deserve so much better than what I've been giving you." For a few weeks things improved. Austin left for work every morning and came home with stories about his co-workers and the projects they were building. He was attentive and loving, the man I'd fallen in love with. I started to believe we'd turned a corner. Then I got pregnant. Finding out I was carrying Riker should have been the happiest moment of my life. Instead, it marked the beginning of my transformation from wife to prisoner. "This is perfect," Austin said when I showed him the positive test. "Now you can quit that job and focus on being a real wife and mother." "I love my job," I protested. "Besides, we need the income. Especially with a baby coming." His face darkened. "Are you saying I can't provide for my own family?" "That's not what I meant." "'Cause that's what it sounds like." "That's exactly what it sounds like." He was standing now, pacing our small living room like a caged animal. "My own wife doesn't think I'm man enough to take care of her and our kid." "Austin, please." "No." He slammed his hand against the wall, leaving a dent in the drywall. "I'm sick of you emasculating me every chance you get. A real woman would trust her husband to handle things." The fight that followed was brutal. He didn't hit me, he was too smart for that, especially with a baby on the way, but his words cut deeper than any physical blow could have. "You're selfish," he spat. "You care more about some stupid job than your own family. What kind of mother is going to abandon her baby to sit in some office all day?" By the time he was finished, I was sobbing on the couch, convinced that maybe he was right. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe a good mother would want to stay home and devote herself entirely to her family. I gave my notice the next week. Austin's reaction was everything I'd hoped for. He was tender and grateful, constantly touching my growing belly and talking about our future together. "This is how it should be," he'd say. "Just us. Our little family. You'll see, Lucy, we don't need anybody else." But without my job I had no income. And somehow, Austin's construction work became increasingly sporadic. "The economy's tough right now," he'd explain, settling into his recliner with a beer while I struggled to balance our checkbook. "Lot of competition for jobs." I started freelancing, taking on small consulting projects I could do from home. It wasn't much, but it helped keep us afloat. Austin tolerated it as long as it didn't interfere with his needs. "I work hard all day," he'd say when I was trying to meet a deadline. "The least you can do is have dinner ready when I get home." His mother, Claudia, visited more frequently as my pregnancy progressed. She was a sharp-faced woman with cruel eyes and a mouth that seemed permanently twisted into a disapproving frown. From the moment I met her, I could tell she thought I wasn't good enough for her precious son. "Austin tells me you're not working anymore," she said during one visit, her voice dripping with false concern. "That must be so hard for him, having to carry the entire financial burden." "I'm still doing some consulting work," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. She waved a dismissive hand. "Part-time nonsense. Austin needs a wife who can support him properly, not add to his stress." I wanted to point out that I'd been supporting Austin since our second month of marriage, that my part-time nonsense was paying for the groceries she was eating and the roof over her head. But Austin was watching me with a warning look in his eyes, and I'd learned to recognize the signs of an impending explosion. When Riker was born, I thought everything would change. Surely becoming a father would inspire Austin to step up, to become the provider and protector he claimed he wanted to be. Instead, it gave him a new weapon to use against me. "You're not holding him right," he'd criticize when I was feeding Riker. "He's crying because you don't know what you're doing. Maybe you should try walking him," I'd suggest when Austin complained about the baby's fussing. "I work all day. Taking care of the baby is your job." But he didn't work all day. Some weeks he didn't work at all. I'd catch glimpses of him through the window, sitting in his truck in the driveway, talking on the phone or just staring off into space. When I asked about it, he'd fly into a rage about how I was spying on him and didn't trust him. The physical abuse started when Riker was 6 months old. Austin came home drunk one night, stumbling into furniture and cursing at everything in his path. "Where's my dinner?" he demanded. "I kept a plate warm for you," I said, hurrying to the kitchen. "I wasn't sure when you'd be home." "You weren't sure." He followed me, his voice growing louder. "A wife is supposed to have food ready for her husband. That's basic." "It is ready. I just need to heat it up." He grabbed the plate from my hands and hurled it against the wall. Spaghetti sauce splattered across the white paint like blood. "I said hot," he roared. "Not reheated garbage." Riker started crying from his crib in the next room. The sound seemed to enrage Austin further. "Now look what you've done. You've upset the baby with your incompetence." I tried to move past him to get to Riker, but Austin blocked my way. His face was flushed with alcohol and anger, his eyes wild. "Where do you think you're going?" "Riker needs me. Riker needs a mother who knows how to take care of her family." His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist, twisting until I cried out. Maybe if you weren't so useless, he wouldn't be crying all the time. The pain in my wrist was nothing compared to the fear blooming in my chest. This wasn't just anger. This was something darker, more dangerous. "Austin, you're hurting me." "I'm trying to teach you," he said, his grip tightening. "You need to learn to do things right the first time." He held me there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, his fingers digging into my skin until I was sure he'd leave marks. Finally, he released me with a shove that sent me stumbling backward. "Clean up this mess," he ordered, already heading toward the living room. "And get me another beer." I stood in the kitchen, cradling my throbbing wrist and listening to my baby cry, and realized I was in serious trouble. The abuse became routine, as predictable as Austin's morning coffee and evening beer. He'd find fault with something. Dinner was too cold, too hot, too spicy, too bland. The house was too messy, too sterile, too something that justified his anger. He'd shout, sometimes throw things, occasionally grab me hard enough to leave bruises in places where they wouldn't show. Then would come the apology. "I'm so sorry, baby," he'd whisper, holding me close while I trembled. "You know I love you more than anything. I just get so frustrated sometimes. You understand, right?" And somehow, impossibly, I did understand. Or at least I convinced myself I did. Austin was under so much pressure trying to provide for our family. The construction industry was unpredictable. He was doing the best he could. The bruises on my ribs told a different story, but I became an expert at hiding them. Long sleeves in summer, makeup to cover the occasional mark on my neck or face, excuses for why I winced when I moved too quickly. Riker was walking by the time Austin's mother started making regular demands on our already strained finances. "The property taxes on my house have gone up," Claudia announced during one of her weekly visits. "I need $3,000 by the end of the month." I looked up from where I was helping Riker with his blocks. "3,000? Claudia, we don't have that kind of money just sitting around." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you telling me you won't help your husband's mother? After everything Austin has sacrificed for you?" "It's not that I won't help," I said carefully. "It's that I literally don't have $3,000 to give you." "What about that consulting work you're always doing?" My consulting work brought in maybe $800 a month on a good month. Most of that went toward groceries and utilities that Austin's sporadic construction income couldn't cover. "Mom, Lucy's right," Austin said, and for a moment I felt a surge of gratitude. "We're pretty tight right now." "Then maybe Lucy should get a real job," Claudia snapped. "Instead of playing around on her computer all day while you break your back to support this family." Playing around. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Those hours on my computer were the only thing keeping us from eviction. "I'll figure something out," Austin said, shooting me a look that made my stomach clench. "Lucy always manages to find money when she really needs to." That night, after Riker was asleep, Austin cornered me in our bedroom. "We need to discuss my mother's situation." "Austin, I've told you, we don't have $3,000. I can maybe scrape together a few hundred if I pick up an extra project, but..." "A few hundred?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "My mother raised me by herself. She sacrificed everything for me. And you're telling me the best you can do is a few $100s. I'm doing the best I can with what we have." "No, you're being selfish. As usual." He started pacing, a sure sign that his temper was building. "You know what your problem is, Lucy? You've never learned to put family first." "I put this family first every single day," I shot back, my own frustration finally boiling over. I gave up my career for this family. I stay home with Riker while you disappear for hours at a time. I work nights and weekends just to keep food on the table. The slap came without warning, hard enough to snap my head to the side and bring tears to my eyes. Don't you ever, he said, his face inches from mine, talk to me like that again. Everything I do is for this family. Everything. And if you can't see that, if you can't appreciate the sacrifices I make, then maybe you don't deserve what I'm trying to build for us. I touched my cheek, feeling the heat of his handprint. Austin. Figure out how to get the money, he said, already turning away. I don't care what you have to do. My mother needs our help and we're going to give it to her. I stood there in the dark, listening to him brush his teeth like nothing had happened, and wondered how my life had become this nightmare. But I got the money. I took on 3 additional consulting projects, working 18-hour days while juggling Riker's care. I survived on coffee and determination, falling asleep at my computer more than once. The stress made me irritable and exhausted, which only gave Austin more ammunition. You're always cranky now, he'd complain. Riker's going to think his mother doesn't love him. I'm working to pay your mother's property taxes. I wanted to scream. Instead, I apologized and tried to smile more, even when every muscle in my body ached from exhaustion. When I finally handed Claudia the check for $3,000, she barely looked at it. It's about time, she said. I was starting to worry that Austin had married someone who didn't understand family loyalty. That was the beginning of a pattern that would define the next 6 years of my marriage. Every few months, Claudia would have a crisis that required immediate financial assistance. Her car needed repairs. Her roof was leaking. Her medical bills were overwhelming. And somehow it was always my responsibility to solve these problems. She's family, Austin would say whenever I tried to protest. And family takes care of family. But I wasn't family, not really. I was an ATM with legs, a convenient source of income that could be bullied and manipulated into compliance. When I didn't produce money fast enough, Austin would escalate the pressure. The grabbing became pushing. The pushing became shaking. The shaking became the occasional punch to my stomach or ribs, places where the bruises wouldn't show. This wouldn't happen if you just did what you were supposed to do, he'd say afterward as I curled up in a ball on our bedroom floor. I hate having to get physical, Lucy, but sometimes it's the only way to get through to you. The worst part wasn't the physical pain. It was watching my son learn that this was normal. That it was acceptable for men to hurt women when they were frustrated. That women existed to serve and please and absorb punishment without complaint. Riker started having nightmares around his 4th birthday. He'd wake up screaming, and when I went to comfort him, he'd flinch away from my touch. It's okay, baby, I'd whisper, my heart breaking. Mommy's here. Don't let Daddy hurt you anymore, he'd sob into my shoulder. Those words cut deeper than any blow Austin had ever landed. The morning it all came crashing down started like any other. 2 years has passed already. Riker was already 6. I was making coffee, always coffee, because Austin needed his caffeine to function, and Riker had developed a habit of wanting coffee, like Daddy, though I made his mostly warm milk with just a splash of actual coffee to give it color. Austin was in the living room, scrolling through his phone and complaining about some imaginary slight from his supervisor. I'd learned to make sympathetic noises without really listening. Engagement only encouraged him to rant longer. The doorbell rang at exactly 9:15. Austin never moved to answer it when his mother was expected. That was my job, apparently. Playing hostess to the woman who treated me like a servant in my own home. Good morning, Claudia, I said, opening the door with the fake smile I'd perfected over the years. She brushed past me without returning the greeting, her face set in its usual expression of grim determination. She was a woman on a mission, and I had a sinking feeling I knew what that mission entailed. Austin, she called out, settling herself at my kitchen table like she owned the place. We need to talk. I poured her coffee without being asked and set it in front of her, along with the cream and sugar she preferred. Years of practice had taught me to anticipate her needs. It was easier than dealing with her complaints. What's going on, Mom? Austin asked, finally joining us in the kitchen. He kissed her cheek and shot me a look that clearly said I should make myself scarce. But I was tired of being dismissed from conversations about my own finances. I stayed by the counter, pretending to be busy cleaning up the breakfast dishes. The bank sent another notice about the mortgage, Claudia said, pulling a crumpled envelope from her purse. They want the full amount by Friday or they're starting foreclosure proceedings. My stomach dropped. The full amount could mean anything from $5,000 to $50,000, depending on how far behind she was. How much are we talking about? Austin asked. $15,000. I actually gasped. $15,000. I'd been scraping together a few thousand here and there for her various crises, but $15,000 was more than I made in 4 months of consulting work. Mom, that's a lot of money, Austin said, and I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he would stand up to her this time. I know it is, Claudia replied, her voice taking on the martyred tone she used whenever she wanted to manipulate Austin. But I don't know where else to turn. You're my only son, Austin. If I lose the house, I'll have nowhere to go. The emotional manipulation was so transparent it made me sick. Claudia owned that house outright, had inherited it from Austin's grandmother years ago. The only reason she had a mortgage at all was because she'd refinanced it multiple times to fund her gambling addiction, something she thought I didn't know about. We'll figure something out, Austin said, and I watched my hopes crumble. Lucy's been doing pretty well with her consulting work lately. Pretty well. As if the 18-hour days and constant stress were some kind of hobby I did for fun. Actually, I said, finding my voice, I don't think we can manage $15,000. That's way beyond what I can earn in such a short time frame. The silence that followed was deafening. Both Austin and Claudia turned to stare at me like I'd just confessed to murder. Excuse me, Austin said, his voice dangerously soft. I said we don't have $15,000. And I can't earn that much by Friday. Claudia's face flushed red. Are you telling me you're going to let your husband's mother become homeless? I'm telling you that I can't produce money I don't have, I replied, proud of how steady my voice sounded despite my racing heart. Can't or won't. Austin stood up from his chair, and I recognized the signs of an impending explosion. Because there's a difference, Lucy. I've given your mother over $20,000 in the past 2 years, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. $20,000 from my consulting work, while you've contributed maybe half that to our household expenses. The truth hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Austin's face went through several color changes, red to white to a mottled purple that usually preceded violence. How dare you, he whispered. Austin. How dare you stand there and disrespect me in front of my mother? He was moving toward me now, and I instinctively backed toward the sink. Riker was still at the table, his small hands wrapped around his coffee cup, watching everything with those 2 knowing eyes. I'm not disrespecting you, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I'm just being honest about our financial situation. Honest? Austin's laugh was ugly. You want to be honest? Let's be honest about what a selfish, ungrateful. Austin, the child is right there, I said, nodding toward Riker. That was my mistake. Mentioning Riker, trying to protect him, reminded Austin that he had an audience for his performance. Yeah, he is right there, Austin said, his voice getting louder. And maybe it's time he learned what happens when women don't respect their husbands. The fear that had been building in my chest exploded into full-blown panic. Please don't do this in front of him. Pay the money, Lucy. Austin reached for his coffee mug, and something in his movement made every alarm bell in my head start ringing. I told you I don't have $15,000. Then get it. How? I don't care how, he roared. Sell something, borrow it, rob a bank, I don't give a damn. But my mother is not losing her house because my wife is too selfish to help family. The coffee mug was in his hand now, steam still rising from the black liquid inside. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the moment he decided that words weren't going to be enough this time. Austin, please. You know what your problem is? He took a step closer and I pressed my back against the counter. You think you're better than us. You think because you went to college and had some fancy job, you're too good to take care of your family. That's not true. It is true. Another step. You look down on me, on my mother, like we're beneath you. Well, let me remind you who's in charge in this house. I saw his arm move, saw the mug tilting, and threw my hands up to protect my face. But Austin was aiming higher. The scalding coffee hit the top of my head and ran down my face, my neck, soaking through my shirt. The pain was instantaneous and overwhelming, a burning agony that made me scream and drop to my knees. Through my tears and the horrible burning sensation, I heard Claudia laugh. actually laugh, like watching her son pour boiling liquid on his wife was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. Maybe next time you'll think twice before being so disrespectful, she said, her voice filled with satisfaction. I was on my hands and knees now, coffee dripping from my hair onto the kitchen floor, my scalp on fire. The smell of burned skin filled the air, mixing with the aroma of spilled coffee in a nauseating combination. Above me, Austin was still talking something about respect and lessons learned, but I couldn't focus on his words through the pain. All I could think about was Riker, my sweet boy, sitting at the table watching his father torture his mother. And then I heard something that made my blood run cold. The scraping of a chair being pushed back. Little footsteps on the kitchen floor. No, Riker, I tried to say, but my voice came out as a croak. Stay where you are, baby. But Riker wasn't listening to me. He wasn't running away or cowering in fear like I'd expected. He was walking toward his father. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. I lifted my head from the floor, coffee still dripping from my hair, and watched my 6-year-old son approach his father with a determination that both terrified and amazed me. Austin was still ranting, still holding the empty coffee mug like a trophy, basking in his moment of dominance. Riker's small hands were shaking, but his face, God, his little face was set with a resolve I'd never seen before. In his grip was his own coffee mug, still half full of the warm, milky mixture I'd made him. Daddy, he said, his voice crystal clear in the sudden silence. Austin turned, a satisfied smirk still playing at his lips. What is it, son? What happened next unfolded like a scene from a movie, each second stretched and crystallized in my memory. Riker didn't say another word. Instead, he climbed onto his chair, then onto the table with the determined movements of a child on a mission. Austin's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion. Riker, get down from there, he started to say. But before the words were fully out of his mouth, my son lifted his mug high above his head and dumped the entire contents onto his father's face and hair. The silence that followed was absolute. Austin stood frozen, warm milky coffee dripping from his hair, his mouth hanging open in shock. Claudia's laughter died abruptly, her face going pale. And I stared at my little boy with a mixture of terror and pride that made my chest feel like it might explode. How does that feel, Daddy? Riker asked, his voice steady and clear. Does it hurt? For a moment nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The only sound was the steady drip of liquid hitting the kitchen floor. Then Austin's face began to change. The shock melted away, replaced by a rage more intense than anything I'd ever seen from him. His whole body started to shake, his hands clenching into fists. You little, he began, lunging toward Riker. But my son was already moving. He jumped down from the table and ran to where I'd left my phone on the counter, his small fingers working with a dexterity that stunned me. Riker, no. Austin roared, coffee still streaming down his face as he gave chase. But Riker was fast, fueled by adrenaline and purpose. He dodged around the kitchen island, my phone pressed to his ear. 911. His voice was high and scared but determined. My daddy hurt my mommy. He poured hot coffee on her head and it burned her. We live at 247 Maple Street. Please send help. The words hit Austin like a physical blow. His face went from rage red to ash white in seconds. Hang up that phone right now, he demanded, advancing on Riker. But my son wasn't done. As Austin reached for him, Riker darted toward the back door, still clutching my phone. My mommy has burn marks, he continued breathlessly into the phone as he ran. My daddy always hurts her when she doesn't give money to grandma. Please hurry. Austin caught up to him just as Riker reached the door, grabbing for the phone with desperation I'd never seen from him before. Give me that phone, you little brat. But Riker was already outside, running across our backyard toward the Ashton's house next door. I could hear him screaming as he ran. Mrs. Ashton. Mrs. Ashton. Help my mommy. Austin started to follow, then stopped abruptly, probably realizing that chasing a 6-year-old through the neighborhood while covered in coffee and screaming threats wouldn't help his case with the police, who were undoubtedly on their way. He came back inside. He spun around to face me, and the look in his eyes made my blood freeze. Look what you've done, he hissed. Look what your stubbornness has caused. I was still on my knees on the kitchen floor, my scalp burning, my shirt soaked with cooling coffee. But for the first time in years I wasn't afraid of him. "I didn't do this," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "You did this. You chose to pour hot coffee on me. You chose to do it in front of our son. You made me." "No." I struggled to my feet, ignoring the pain. "I didn't make you do anything. This is all you, Austin. This is who you really are." From outside I could hear Riker's voice getting closer, accompanied by other voices. Mrs. Ashton, probably her husband too. My brave little boy was bringing help. Claudia, who had been sitting in stunned silence since Riker's rebellion, finally found her voice. "We need to call our lawyer," she said, her voice sharp with panic. "This is bad, Austin. If the police come..." "I know how bad this is," Austin snapped. But I was starting to realize that he didn't know. Neither of them understood what Riker had really done, what he'd set in motion with that phone call and his desperate run for help. Through the kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Ashton walking quickly toward our house, one arm around Riker's shoulders, her phone pressed to her ear. Behind them, her husband was jogging to catch up, his face grim. The cavalry was coming. The sound of sirens in the distance made Austin's face go even paler. "Lucy," he said, his voice suddenly pleading. "You know I didn't mean it. I was just frustrated about Mom's situation. You know I'd never really hurt you." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time since we'd met. The charming facade was completely gone, stripped away by panic to reveal the weak, cruel man underneath. "Show them your arms," I said quietly. "What?" "When the police get here, show them your arms." The coffee was hot enough to burn my scalp. "If you were really just frustrated and didn't mean to hurt me, you would have burns on your arms from the splashback." Austin looked down at his arms, perfectly unburned, and I saw understanding dawn in his eyes. He'd been careful. He'd angled the mug deliberately to avoid hurting himself while maximizing the damage to me. The sirens were getting closer. "Lucy, please," he whispered. "Think about Riker. Think about what this will do to him." "I am thinking about Riker," I replied. "That's all I've been doing for 6 years. And I'm finally ready to protect him from you." The front door burst open without ceremony. Mrs. Ashton walked in like she owned the place, still holding Riker's hand, followed by her husband Tom and 2 police officers. "Lucy." Mrs. Ashton rushed to me, her face filled with concern. "Oh my God, honey, your head." One of the officers, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, approached me carefully. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Andrea. We received a call about a domestic assault. Are you injured?" Before I could answer, Riker broke free from Mrs. Ashton's grip and ran to me. "Mommy, I called the police like you taught me," he said, wrapping his small arms around my legs. "Are you okay?" Like I taught him. I'd never taught him to call 911, but somehow he'd absorbed it from school safety programs or television. My brilliant, brave boy had known exactly what to do when his father crossed the line. "I'm okay, baby," I whispered, stroking his hair with shaking hands. "You did exactly the right thing." "Ma'am." Officer Andrea was still waiting for my answer. I looked directly at Austin as I spoke. "Yes, I'm injured. My husband poured hot coffee on my head because I refused to give his mother $15,000. The second officer, a younger man, was already pulling out his notepad. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step over here," he said to Austin. "This is all a misunderstanding," Austin said quickly. "My wife and I were having a disagreement and I accidentally spilled." "He didn't accidentally spill anything," Riker interrupted, his voice high but determined. "He threw it on Mommy's head on purpose. I saw him do it." And Grandma laughed. All eyes turned to Claudia, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "The child is confused," she said quickly. "He's upset, Anne." "I'm not confused." Riker's voice rose. "Daddy hurts Mommy all the time. He pushes her and grabs her arms and makes her cry." The silence that followed was deafening. Officer Andrea knelt down to Riker's level. "Sweetheart, can you tell me more about that? When does your daddy hurt your mommy?" "When she doesn't give Grandma money," Riker said matter-of-factly. "Grandma always needs money, and when Mommy says no, Daddy gets mad and hurts her." I watched Austin's face cycle through emotions. Panic, rage, desperation. This wasn't going the way he'd planned. This wasn't a situation he could control or manipulate. Ma'am, we need to get you medical attention for those burns, Officer Andrea said, standing up. And then we're going to need to take a full statement. But Riker wasn't finished. With the fearlessness that only children possess, he walked right up to the officer. I took pictures, he announced. Everyone froze. What pictures, sweetheart? Officer Andrea asked gently. On Mommy's phone. When Daddy wasn't looking, I took pictures of the bruises on Mommy's arms. And her neck. I hid them in a special folder. My phone. The phone he'd used to call 911, the phone that was probably still in his possession. Austin made a desperate lunge toward Riker, but Tom Ashton stepped between them, his usually friendly demeanor replaced by something much more dangerous. I don't think so, Tom said quietly. The younger officer was already moving to restrain Austin. Sir, I need you to calm down and keep your hands where I can see them. Officer Andrea held out her hand to Riker. Can you show me these pictures, honey? My son nodded solemnly and produced my phone from his pocket. With the technological fluency that seemed to come naturally to his generation, he navigated to the phone's photo gallery. I made a secret folder, he said proudly. See? It's called Evidence. Evidence. My 6-year-old son had created a folder called Evidence. Officer Andrea scrolled through the photos, her expression growing grimmer with each image. There were at least a dozen pictures of bruises on my ribs, fingerprint marks on my upper arms, a particularly nasty mark on my collarbone from where Austin had grabbed me last month. Ma'am, how long has this been going on? She asked me. Years, I whispered. But it got worse after. I glanced at Riker, not wanting to traumatize him further with details. After Grandma started needing money, Riker finished matter-of-factly. Daddy gets really mad when Mommy can't pay for Grandma's stuff. Claudia made a strangled sound. Austin, do something. But Austin was already in handcuffs, the younger officer reading him his rights in a monotone voice that seemed to echo through my kitchen. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. I watched my husband, my abuser, being arrested in my own kitchen, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. But the real shock came when Officer Andrea turned to Claudia. Ma'am, I'm going to need to speak with you as well. We have a witness statement that you were present during the assault and that you laughed. Claudia's face went white. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just the mother-in-law. Actually, Mrs. Ashton spoke up. I saw the whole thing through the window when Riker came running over. The older woman was definitely encouraging it. Tom nodded. My wife called me to the window when she saw what was happening. We both witnessed this woman laughing while her son poured hot coffee on his wife. That makes you an accessory, Officer Andrea said to Claudia. And possibly guilty of aiding and abetting domestic violence. The look of shock and terror on Claudia's face was almost worth 6 years of abuse. But I didn't touch her, she protested. You encouraged it, witnessed it, and made no attempt to stop it or call for help, the officer replied. In this state, that makes you complicit. As they led both Austin and Claudia toward the door in handcuffs, Austin looked back at me with pure hatred in his eyes. This isn't over, Lucy, he said. You think you're so smart, but you just destroyed our family. Riker will never forgive you for this. I looked down at my son who was still clinging to my legs and then back at Austin. Riker saved me, I said clearly. He's braver than you'll ever be. The front door closed behind them, leaving me alone with the officers, the Ashtons, and my incredible son. But we weren't done yet. Not even close. While Officer Andrea took my statement and arranged for me to be seen by a paramedic for the burns on my scalp, Riker continued to surprise everyone with his thorough documentation of our family's dysfunction. There's more, he told the officer seriously. In Mommy's computer. What kind of more? Officer Andrea asked. Mommy keeps papers about all the money Daddy and Grandma took. She showed me once when I asked why she was always sad about the computer numbers. Financial records. Of course. In my years of freelance consulting, I'd developed the habit of meticulous record-keeping. Every penny that went to Claudia's endless crises was documented, categorized, and dated. Riker, can you show Officer Andrea where Mommy keeps those papers? I asked, still somewhat stunned by my son's initiative. He nodded and led her to my home office, chattering away about how I'd taught him that keeping track of money was important, and how he'd noticed that Daddy never seemed to have money but Mommy was always working to find some. While they were gone, Mrs. Ashton sat with me at the kitchen table, carefully helping me clean the coffee residue from my hair. "Lucy, honey, how long has this been going on?" she asked gently. "Too long," I admitted. "I kept thinking it would get better, that Austin would change. And I was so isolated, I didn't think anyone would believe me." "We've seen things," Tom said quietly from where he stood by the window keeping watch. "Heard arguments, seen you with injuries you claimed were accidents. We talked about saying something, but it's hard to interfere in someone else's marriage," I finished. "I understand. We should have done something sooner," Mrs. Ashton said, tears in her eyes. "We failed you." "No," I said firmly. "The only people who failed me were Austin and Claudia. Everyone else was just trying to respect my choices, even when they were clearly bad choices." Officer Andrea returned with Riker and a box full of my financial documents, her expression grim. "Mrs. Austin, based on what your son has shown me, I think we need to talk about fraud charges as well." "Fraud? These records show systematic financial abuse. Your husband and his mother have essentially been extorting money from you through threats and violence. That's a serious felony." She spread out some of my bank statements on the table. "In the past 2 years alone, you've given them over $30,000. And according to your records, your husband has contributed less than $8,000 to household expenses during that same period." Seeing it laid out like that in black and white made the scope of the abuse crystal clear. I hadn't just been a battered wife. I'd been a victim of organized financial exploitation. "There's something else," Riker said, tugging on Officer Andrea's sleeve. "Daddy has a secret phone." My blood ran cold. "What secret phone, baby?" "In his truck. He talks to a lady on it sometimes when he took me out for ice cream. She calls him baby, and he laughs with her. But he told Mommy he was working." "The affair." Of course there was an affair. The sporadic work schedule, the mysterious absences, the complete lack of remorse for his treatment of me. It all made sense now. Officer Andrea was already calling for additional units. "We need to search the vehicle," she told her colleague. What they found in Austin's truck was damning. The burner phone Riker had mentioned, filled with text messages between Austin and a woman named Alma. Messages that made it clear their relationship was both romantic and long-standing. But that wasn't the worst discovery. Hidden under the driver's seat were documents that made my head spin. Bank statements for accounts I'd never seen, showing regular deposits from a construction company where Austin claimed to work sporadically. The truth was he'd been working full-time for over 2 years, earning a substantial salary that he'd hidden from me while forcing me to support our family through consulting work. "He's been lying about everything," Officer Andrea said when she brought me the evidence. "The sporadic work, the financial struggles, all of it was fabricated to justify taking your money." I stared at the bank statements, calculating rapidly. Austin had earned over $60,000 last year alone, money he'd hidden while watching me work 18-hour days to pay his mother's bills and keep food on our table. "What does this mean?" I asked. "It means we're looking at multiple felony charges. Financial fraud, domestic abuse, filing false financial statements if he's claimed hardship for any benefits. Mrs. Austin, your husband is looking at serious prison time." The magnitude of the deception was staggering. Austin hadn't just been abusing me physically, he'd been systematically stealing from me while forcing me to believe I was the family's financial burden. But even that wasn't the end of the discoveries that day. Mrs. Ashton, bless her heart, had taken it upon herself to call my sister in Portland. My sister I'd lost touch with because Austin had gradually isolated me from my entire support system. "Lucy." The familiar voice on the phone made me break down completely. "Megan told me what happened. I'm already in the car, I'll be there in 3 hours. My sister Jean." I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, hadn't seen her in 3, all because Austin had convinced me that my family looked down on us and didn't want to be involved in our struggles. "I'm so sorry," I sobbed into the phone. "I'm so sorry I disappeared." "Don't you apologize for anything," Jean said fiercely. "I should have fought harder to stay in touch. I knew something was wrong, but I let Austin's excuses convince me to back off. Never again, Lucy. Never again." As the afternoon wore on, my kitchen became command central for what felt like a small army of people determined to help me put my life back together. Jean arrived with 2 suitcases and a grim determination to make up for lost time. My lawyer, recommended by the Ashtons, appeared with preliminary paperwork for divorce proceedings and restraining orders. But it was Riker who provided the final, most satisfying piece of evidence. "Mommy," he said, tugging on my sleeve as the lawyer explained my options. "I forgot to tell the police lady about Daddy's friend at the bank." "What friend at the bank, sweetie?" "The lady who helped him hide the money. I heard him talking to her on the secret phone. She was helping him put money in accounts you couldn't see." The lawyer and Officer Andrea exchanged glances. "Riker, do you remember anything specific about what they said?" the lawyer asked gently. My son nodded solemnly. "Daddy said, 'Thanks for keeping Lucy's name off the accounts,' and the lady said, 'That's what friends are for, baby.'" Bank fraud. Not only had Austin been hiding his income, but he'd been working with someone at the bank to actively conceal assets from me. "This just gets better and better," Officer Andrea muttered, making another note. By the time visiting hours ended at the county jail, Austin and Claudia had been charged with domestic violence, financial fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy. The bail had been set high enough that neither of them would be getting out anytime soon. I sat in my kitchen that evening, surrounded by my sister, the Ashtons, and my brave little boy, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. "What happens now?" I asked the room in general. "Now," Jean said, squeezing my hand, "you rebuild. You take back everything they stole from you and you show Riker what a strong woman really looks like." Riker looked up from where he was drawing pictures at the table. "Mommy, are you going to be okay now?" I pulled him onto my lap, careful of my bandaged scalp, and held him close. "We're going to be better than okay, baby. We're going to be free." 3 months later, I stood in the courtroom wearing a green beautiful dress that actually fit properly, the first new clothes I'd bought for myself in years. My hair had grown back over the burn scars, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt strong. Austin sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, flanked by a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The confident, controlling man I'd once feared was gone, replaced by someone who looked small and defeated. Claudia sat beside him, equally diminished, her usual imperious demeanor replaced by the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd finally realized the consequences of their actions. The prosecution had done their job well. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of documented abuse, hidden assets, bank fraud, extortion. Austin's secret girlfriend had turned state's evidence in exchange for immunity, providing recorded conversations that painted a clear picture of his calculated deception. But the most damning testimony came from an unexpected source. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "the state calls Riker Austin to the stand." My brave little boy walked to the witness stand with the same determination he'd shown that day in the kitchen. The judge had arranged for a child advocate to be present, and the questioning was gentle, but Riker's testimony was devastating. "My daddy used to hurt my mommy when she couldn't pay grandma's bills," he said clearly, his small voice carrying through the courtroom. "He would grab her and push her and pour coffee on her head. Grandma would laugh when it happened." "Did you ever try to help your mommy?" the prosecutor asked. "I took pictures of the bruises," Riker said matter-of-factly. "And I called the police when Daddy burned Mommy's head with the coffee." Austin's lawyer tried to argue that a child's testimony wasn't reliable, but the physical evidence backed up every word Riker said. When it came time for sentencing, I was given the opportunity to make a victim impact statement. I stood at the podium and looked directly at Austin and Claudia, these people who had stolen 6 years of my life and tried to break my spirit. "You didn't just abuse me," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You taught my son that violence was normal, that women existed to be hurt and exploited. You stole my money, my dignity, and my sense of self-worth." Austin wouldn't meet my eyes, but I continued anyway. "But you made a mistake. You underestimated how much I loved my son, and you completely underestimated him. Riker saved us both the day he decided to fight back. He showed more courage at 6 years old than either of you have shown in your entire lives." I turned to address the judge directly. "Your Honor, these defendants didn't just commit crimes against me. They committed crimes against my child, forcing him to witness abuse and trauma that no child should ever see. I ask you to consider not just what they took from me but what they tried to steal from him. His childhood, his sense of security, his faith in the adults who were supposed to protect him. The sentences were everything I'd hoped for and more. Austin received 12 years for domestic violence, financial fraud, and conspiracy. Claudia got 7 years as an accessory to domestic violence and fraud. The bank employee who'd helped hide Austin's assets got 5 years and permanent banishment from the banking industry. But the legal victory was only part of my revenge. The real satisfaction came in what happened after the trial. With Austin's hidden assets now legally mine, along with restitution for the money they'd stolen over the years, I found myself in a better financial position than I'd ever been in, even before I met Austin. The construction company that had been paying Austin's salary was also held liable for their role in helping him hide income, resulting in an additional settlement that secured Riker's college fund. I used some of the money to buy a new house in a different neighborhood. A fresh start for both of us. But more importantly, I used it to build something I'd been dreaming about during the darkest days of my marriage. A personal business of my own. I opened a small boutique, I explained to Jean as we sat in my new kitchen, watching Riker play in our spacious backyard. A place where women can shop, feel confident, and know they don't need anyone else's approval to shine. The business started small but word spread quickly. Within a year I had expanded into an online store, hired a few employees, women who, like me, had rebuilt their lives after abuse, and created a supportive little community that was about more than clothes. It became a place of empowerment, a reminder that we were capable of standing on our own. Riker, meanwhile, had blossomed in ways that amazed me daily. The fearful, withdrawn child who used to flinch at loud noises was gone, replaced by a confident, compassionate boy who talked openly about feelings and stood up for classmates who were being bullied. "I want to help people like you helped me," he told me one evening as we worked together on his homework. "How did I help you, baby? You showed me that it's okay to be scared, but you can't let scared people hurt other people. And you taught me that sometimes you have to be brave even when you don't want to be." I never explicitly taught him those things, but somehow he absorbed them from watching our journey together. The best revenge, though, was the life we built together. I started dating again. Carefully, with therapy and support from friends who helped me recognize red flags I had missed before. When I met Peter, a gentle pediatric nurse who treated Riker like his own son and never once asked me to change who I was for his comfort, I knew I had finally learned to choose better. Austin wrote me letters from prison. Apologetic at first, then angry, then pleading. I read the first few, then instructed my lawyer to have them redirected. I had no interest in his attempts to manipulate me from behind bars. Claudia was less persistent in her communications, but equally irrelevant. When she was released after serving 5 years, she moved to another state and made no attempt to contact us. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had found work as a store clerk and was living in a small apartment. A far cry from the lifestyle she had maintained through extorting money from me. The most satisfying revenge, though, was simply being happy. 5 years after that terrible morning in my kitchen, Riker and I stood in the courthouse again, but this time for a celebration, not a trial. At 11 years old, Riker was receiving a community service award for his work volunteering at local shelters, helping other kids who had witnessed domestic violence. "When I was little, my dad hurt my mom," he said into the microphone, addressing an audience full of police officers, social workers, and community leaders. I thought that was just how families worked. But my mom taught me that love isn't supposed to hurt, and that everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home. He looked directly at me as he continued. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is help someone else be brave." The standing ovation lasted for several minutes. Peter squeezed my hand as we watched our son, because that's what Riker had become to him, legally and in every way that mattered. Accept his award with the same quiet determination he had shown that day he called 911. After the ceremony, we drove to our house. The house I'd bought with Austin's stolen money and the insurance settlement. The house where no one had ever raised their voice in anger or hurt anyone out of spite. Riker ran ahead to let our dog out, still wearing his suit and tie but already planning to change into play clothes. My boutique now had 2 locations, a thriving online business and a loyal customer base of women who weren't just buying clothes. They were buying confidence. Riker's brave phone call that day had started a ripple effect that was still spreading. Watching my son's face light up as he threw the ball for our dog. The best revenge is living well. And we're living very, very well. Inside the house, I had a framed photo on my desk. A picture of Riker from the day he received his award, his face serious and proud as he spoke to the audience about courage and asking for help. But next to it, I kept something else. A copy of the arrest report from that day in the kitchen, highlighting the section where the officer had noted the evidence collected, including photographs taken by a 6-year-old boy who had been brave enough to document his father's crimes. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't about hurting the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's about taking everything they tried to steal, your strength, your voice, your future, and using it to build something beautiful. Austin still sends letters occasionally. They go straight into the shredder unread. I don't need to know what he has to say anymore. His opinion stopped mattering the moment hot coffee hit my scalp and my son decided to fight back. The only voices that matter now are the ones that lift me up. My son's laughter, my husband's gentle encouragement, and the grateful customers who walk out of my boutique smiling at their reflection. That's the sweetest revenge of all. A life so full of love and purpose that there's no room left for anger. Austin took 6 years from me. But in return he gave me something invaluable. The knowledge that I was stronger than I ever imagined, and that sometimes the smallest voices can roar the loudest when justice is on their side. My son taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and choosing to do the right thing anyway. And that lesson, learned from a 6-year-old boy who poured coffee on his father's head and called 911, was worth every moment of pain it took to get here.